Now, let's imagine that you have a favorite teacher. The only problem is, this teacher has something a little bit ghostly about them. Something that makes you see double. Hi, I'm Heidi from Obsession Podcast. Welcome to the show, and today we are talking about the spooky teacher, Emilie Sargee. And while I talk, of course, like I always do, I'm going to do a drawing, and hopefully you will too. It was a summer's day in 1845, and around 14 young ladies were in their sewing and embroidery classes. The school was the Pensionat von Newark in present-day Latvia, and the students were mainly the children of the nobility, most notably Julie von Guldenstub, daughter of a baron. The needlework teacher excused herself from the class, saying that she would be back in a couple of minutes. The girls started to chatter and giggle the way they always did when they were left unsupervised. Well, that is until Mademoiselle Sargee, the pretty French teacher, suddenly entered the room and sat down in the unoccupied chair at the front. She had been picking flowers in the school garden and had obviously been concerned when she'd noticed the teacher leaving the classroom. The girls resumed their silence and bent over their work. Everyone loved Mademoiselle Sargee. She was one of the kindest and one of the best teachers in the school, but she was very strict about maintaining order, and nobody played up in her presence. Well, soon, one of the girls looked out of the window and saw that Mademoiselle Sargee, who was sitting in front of them, could still be seen in the garden amongst the flowers. Whispers spread down the aisles, and before long, every student in the class was aware that there were two Mademoiselle Sargees, one in the room and one outside. The one outside the room was still and did not seem to hear when she was asked questions. She stared straight ahead and barely seemed to be breathing. Two of the bolder girls walked up to her and attempted to touch her. One of the girls claimed that her hand seemed to pass through the teacher, and that the teacher in front of her felt as though she were made of cobwebs. You might think the girls would be terrified, but they were not as shocked as you would expect. Since Emilie Sargee had started teaching at the school, a number of strange things had happened, and her students had dealt with them as calmly as possible. So, who was this mysterious teacher? Well, not much is known about the early life of Emilie Sargee, only that she was born in Dijon, France in 1813, and she moved around frequently during her working life. Almost everything we know about her, and we don't know very much, can be found in a book by Robert Dale Owen called The Footfalls of the Boundary of Another World, and almost everything he knew about her was told to him by Emilie's former student, Julie von Guldenstub. Apparently, Emilie had already taught at 18 different schools by the time she'd been employed by the Pensionat von Newark at the age of 32, and she'd never stayed in the one job for very long. Well, nevertheless, she was clearly a gifted teacher with a wonderful work ethic and a charisma that made her popular with both students and staff. The headmistress was baffled as to why the clever, vivacious French teacher would be unable to hold down a job for any reasonable length of time. Then, during a lesson, students noticed that a ghostly double of Mademoiselle Sargee had appeared at the blackboard, copying every move their teacher made, only without the piece of chalk that Emilie had been holding. Emilie was annoyed and confused when students started calling out to her and pointing to what she saw as an empty space beside her. She could see nothing. In the dining room, both students and teachers would watch with horrified interest as her double appeared beside her and carried on in a pantomime of eating, only without utensils. The distressing thing for Emilie Sargee was that she could never see this ghostly double. She apparently did feel a sudden tiredness during these episodes, and she admitted that the double sometimes showed up in places that she wished she could be at the time, but she had little to no control over what was happening. She'd been fired from every teaching post that she'd ever had, and she'd been forced to move from place to place because of what other people claimed they could see. Eventually, Emilie was forced to leave the pensionnat for new work. While some students took the events calmly, others were terrified, and their parents demanded her dismissal. Emilie was not heard of again, and likely changed her name. So, is there a logical reason for the case of Emilie Sargee? Well, skeptics would say that she'd never existed. The only witness to these events who were on record, well, it's Julie von Guldenstube. Records show that an Octavie Sargee was born in Dijon in 1813, and it isn't unreasonable to think that a person who was constantly hounded out of jobs would have changed their name several times, but there's no definitive proof of her existence. The question is then, why would Julie have invented this story and have it recorded in Robert Dale Owen's book? Well, it's possible that Julie had a wonderful imagination and may have been a horror novelist had she been born in another time, but why would she put her name to a purely fabricated story and risk her reputation? Well, we'll talk about this in more detail in the Obsession podcast that I do with my partner Becky, and you can find this on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. In any case, the idea of a doppelganger is older than the story of Emilie Sargee. Doppelganger in German means double walker or double goer, and can come in two types, human or paranormal. A human doppelganger, or twin stranger as it's more commonly called on social media, is a person who is not biologically related to you, yet bears a striking physical resemblance to you. It's often thought that everyone has a double. There are, after all, only so many genetic sequences that can exist, but it turns out that having a true doppelganger is very rare. In a 2015 Australian study, it was found that the chances of a person finding a completely perfect double is 1 in a trillion. Of course, when it comes to cases like Emilie, we're talking about the paranormal type, And stories about the paranormal variety of doppelgangers have existed throughout history. Seeing your replica has long been associated with impending death. Elizabeth I reportedly saw herself in spirit form shortly before her death, and Abraham Lincoln saw his double reflected in a mirror, causing his wife to predict that he wouldn't live to finish his second term as president. A doppelganger can also be seen as a shadow self, or an evil twin that goes before a person to cause trouble in their lives. People from all cultures have traditionally been advised against interacting with their double and never taking their advice. The idea of a doppelganger being a force of chaos has been a constant theme in literature and cinema, from William Wilson by Edgar Allan Poe to the Darren Aronofsky film Black Swan. The French novelist Guy de Maupassant, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, I'm sorry, was allegedly visited with his own doppelganger, and this apparition is said to have dictated his short story, The Hauler, to him. He did die of syphilis in a mental institution, and, well, that might be relevant. So, is there a scientific explanation for what seems like a ghostly double? Dr. Oliver Sacks tackled this in his book, Hallucinations. Sacks describes the phenomena of a person seeing their phantom self as autoscopic doubles. An autoscopic double can be caused by medical problems such as migraines, epilepsy, or schizophrenia. This doesn't tell us much about cases like Emilie Sargee, where it was other people who saw the double, though. The most common explanation for that particular story might be mass hysteria. The rumours about the teacher had reached the students before reported events, and the students convinced themselves and each other that they saw something. Then there is my favourite theory, the multiverse. This is a theory in quantum physics that there are multiple universes. The idea is that there is a super fast expansion, and at the end of that expansion or inflation, the energy ignites what we basically call the Big Bang. So let's say that our inflation ended 13.7 billion years ago and is still going on in other parts of the universe, and other regions are constantly forming. I love the idea of a parallel universe, and that there could be other versions of ourselves in these universes, and we can occasionally slip into each other's worlds. So, could the students have been seeing the Emily of a parallel universe? Well, that's of course assuming that there was one Emily in the first place, and that she wasn't entirely fictional. Well, fictional or not, I find the idea of her intriguing, and I am going to finish this picture and I'm going to put it up for you to see. And please show me your pictures, and please put your theory in the comments below. And don't forget to check out Obsession, the podcast, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, everywhere where you can find good podcasts. And I'll see you later.